The thing about keeping a secret in a hospital was that hospitals were, structurally, the worst possible environment for secrets. They were buildings designed around observation, monitoring, tracking, noting, recording. Every floor had a nurse's station positioned specifically to see everything. Every shift had a handover that required the reporting of notable developments. Every staff member had, by professional training and personal temperament, a heightened sensitivity to changes in pattern, deviations from baseline, anomalies that warranted documentation. Huda knew all of this. She was a nurse. She had spent 2 years in these corridors understanding exactly how information traveled and at what speed. She was keeping the secret anyway. It had been 3 weeks since the Jongyo dinner. 3 weeks of something that didn't have a name yet because they hadn't given it one. Not because it needed a name, but because names invited questions and questions invited conversations and conversations with certain people about certain things required energy she was rationing carefully. 3 weeks of Saiwen picking her up from work in a car parked on the street 1 block from the hospital entrance. Which was, she was aware, the vehicular equivalent of hiding in plain sight. 3 weeks of Sunday afternoons at Yeonhee's house that had begun as tea and progressively extended into dinner. Then late dinner. Then the kind of evening that ended with her in the back of his car crossing the city in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had run out of the need to fill silence. 3 weeks of Camille. He parked on Bukshinaro, Camille said, on a Tuesday evening, with the satisfied authority of someone delivering a prosecutorial closing argument. She was sitting on Huda's kitchen counter eating crackers from the box, still in her work clothes, wide-leg camel trousers, a fitted black turtleneck, natural hair and a high puff that was doing everything it was supposed to do. Bukshinaro, Huda. That's not around the corner. That's a statement. That's a parking spot. Huda was cooking, nothing elaborate, just jollof rice that she had decided at the last minute she needed. The kind of decision that had nothing to do with Saiwen picking her up in 40 minutes and everything to do with needing her hands occupied. He could park in the hospital lot. Visitors park there all the time. His mother was a patient. He has a relationship with the facility. He's not a visitor anymore. Exactly. Camille pointed a cracker at her. He has no reason to be in that neighborhood except you. And he parks 1 block away like that's discreet. Baby, that man is so obvious it's almost sweet. Huda stirred the rice. Eat your crackers. I'm eating and talking. I'm multi-talented. Camille tilted her head. Has he met Yeon yet since the... He lives with her awareness of everything. She knows. She knows. Camille's cracker stopped halfway to her mouth. Does she know no, or does she suspect no? She knows. Huda turned down the heat. She's been reporting our relationship status to her best friend since day 1. I found out last week she has a group chat. A group chat. 3 people. Herself, her best friend, and apparently a woman called Mrs. O who is her neighbor and has never met either of us, but has very strong opinions about our compatibility based on Yeonhee's updates. Camille stared at her. Then she slid off the counter, walked to Huda, and hugged her from behind with the full sincerity of a best friend who understood that some things deserved physical acknowledgement. She made a group chat for your love life, she said, into her shoulder. She named it, Huda said. What did she name it? A pause. The Pillow Project. Camille made a sound that started as a laugh and became something closer to a spiritual experience. The kind of laughing that bends a person at the waist and takes several seconds to recover from. Huda stirred her rice and waited it out. I love that woman, Camille said, finally, straightening up and wiping her eyes. I love her completely. She is everything. She's a menace, Huda said, but the word had no edge to it. None at all. At the hospital, the situation was, if anything, more developed. Nurse Onsulji had become, over the past 3 weeks, what could only be described as a silent ally, the kind that said nothing directly but positioned themselves consistently on the right side of every situation. She had begun updating Huda's charts when Huda was running behind, covering the nurse's station during moments that would have otherwise required Huda to be in 2 places, and deploying a very specific expression whenever Soi Eon began making observations about Huda's schedule or whereabouts. An expression that was technically neutral but communicated, to anyone paying attention, a complete absence of cooperation. Soyeon was paying attention to everything. She's been here 3 Tuesdays, Soyeon said on a Wednesday morning to Nurse Park Ji-young, near the supply room, in the not-quite-quiet voice of someone who wanted to be overheard specifically by everyone except the person they were discussing. Huda was 3 meters away updating a chart. Tuesdays and Thursdays now, Jiyoung said, with the energy of someone contributing to a document. And she was late back from lunch on Friday. 20 minutes, Soyeon confirmed. Huda turned a page. And the coffee, Soyeon continued. From the place on. I can hear you, Huda said pleasantly without looking up. The acoustics on this floor are very good. They've always been very good. I've mentioned it before. A brief silence. We were just, Soyeon began, discussing my schedule and my lunch break and my coffee. Huda looked up. Which are all, to my understanding, personal information. Not patient information. Not hospital business. She tilted her head. Unless something has changed about the scope of your role. Soyeon, and nobody told me? Soyeon's jaw moved through several positions. Wonderful. Huda closed the chart. I'm going to go check on Mrs. Lee in 408. She has a follow-up panel this afternoon and she gets anxious. Maybe someone could make sure her lunch tray is delivered on time. She mentioned yesterday it was late. She looked at Jiyoung. That would be a good use of the morning. She walked down the corridor. Behind her she heard nothing, which was the sound of 2 nurses having absolutely no response to that, and then the very small, very quickly suppressed sound of Solji, somewhere near the station, exhaling through her nose in what was technically not a laugh. Sunday at Yeonhee's house had become, without formal announcement, a fixture. It had started with the tea invitation in the first week after discharge, extended to lunch by the second, and by the third week had become simply Sunday, a word that had acquired a specific weight in Huda's week, the way certain recurring things do when they stop being plans and start being something you organize the rest of your time around without meaning to. The house was in Gangnam, not the loud, commercial part but the quieter residential edge of it, behind gates, down a short tree, lined approach that managed to feel private without being ostentatious. It was large and beautifully maintained, full of the specific kind of taste that didn't need to announce itself, art that had been chosen for love rather than investment, furniture that was old and perfect, flowers in every room because Yeonhee believed that a house without flowers was a house not fully committed to itself. Huda had walked in the first time and felt, against all expectation, immediately at ease. Not because it was familiar, it was nothing like any space she had grown up in, but because the house had the same quality as its owner. It was completely itself without apology or performance, and it made room for you without requiring you to become something different to fit. This particular Sunday she arrived at 1 o'clock in high-waisted trousers in a warm cognac, a fitted ribbed top in camel, her locks in a low loose style with a single gold cuff at the base, small hoops, clean white sneakers that were somehow perfect with the whole thing. She had learned that Yeonhee noticed everything she wore and had opinions about all of it. Specific, appreciative opinions delivered like assessments rather than compliments, which Huda found she preferred. The cognac is exactly right, Yeonhee said, at the door, looking at her with the eye of a woman who had spent 6 decades developing aesthetic standards. Good morning to you too, Huda said. It's afternoon. Yeonhee stepped back to let her in. Siwon is in the kitchen doing something I told him not to do. What did you tell him not to do? Make the rice himself. He's been practicing. Yeonhee led her through the entrance hall with its low art lighting and its arrangement of white peonies on the console table. Always white, always peonies, always odd numbers. He's been practicing every week since the recipe. I keep telling him it's not ready. He keeps insisting. From the kitchen came the specific sound of someone opening and closing a lid with the focused energy of a person who was, in fact, not entirely sure what they were doing but was committed to the attempt. He's going to burn the sugar, Huda said. He burns it every time, Yeonhee confirmed, with the serenity of a woman who had decided this was charming rather than concerning. Go save it. The kitchen was large and light-filled with the kind of equipment that suggested someone on staff took cooking seriously. All pale stone and brushed steel and a window above the sink that looked into the garden. Siwon was standing at the stove in dark trousers and a cream knit, sleeves pushed up, watching a pan with the focused intensity of a man who had been told something was about to happen, and was determined not to miss it. The sugar was, as predicted, approximately 40 seconds from burning. Move, Huda said, from behind him. He stepped aside immediately, not startled, just responsive. Like he'd known she was there before she spoke. She took the pan handle, turned the heat down slightly, watched the color, waited the specific 3 seconds that her mother had called the moment, and then said, "Now add the meat." He added the meat. She stepped back. He took the handle again. "You were watching the wrong thing," she said. "I was watching the sugar. You watch the edges, not the center. The edges tell you first." She moved to stand beside him, not quite touching, close enough that the space between them was a choice rather than a distance. "Your mother watches the center. That's why she burns it. She's been burning it on purpose," he said. "So I'd keep practicing." Huda looked at him. He kept his eyes on the pan, but the corner of his mouth moved. "She burned it on purpose," Huda said. "Every single time." He adjusted the heat. "I only realized last week when I came in early and caught her doing it deliberately. She looked me dead in the eye and tipped the pan." He paused, and then told me I needed more practice. From the dining room, through the open door, came the completely innocent sound of Yonhee arranging flowers. Huda looked at the ceiling for a moment, that neutral institutional ceiling that had nothing to say about any of this, and then looked back at the pan and felt the laughter come up from somewhere deep, the real kind, the kind that her mother would have recognized. "She's been burning the sugar to keep you in this kitchen," she said. "She's been burning the sugar to keep us in this kitchen," he said. "Together. On Sundays." He glanced at her. "It's working." The kitchen smelled of browning meat and coconut milk and the specific warm spice of a dish that was becoming, slowly and deliberately, something that belonged to the three of them. Outside the window the garden was quiet, the Sunday light falling clean and pale through the glass, and Huda stood in someone else's kitchen on a sole Sunday and felt, with the particular clarity of something that can only be felt and not constructed, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "The Scotch bonnet," she said, and handed it to him. He dropped it in whole without splitting it and left it alone. "Good," she said. He looked at her with the full version of that expression, the rare, real one, and said nothing because nothing needed to be said, because they were standing in a kitchen on a Sunday and the pillow was getting there and his mother was in the next room pretending to arrange flowers, and that was, in its entirety, exactly enough. Dinner was, as all dinners at Yonhee's table had been, an event that refused to be less than it was. Not because of the food, though the food was extraordinary, the pillow served in the slate blue bowl from the market, imperfect in the specific way of something made by hand and therefore better, but because of the quality of attention at the table. Yonhee gave dinner parties the way she gave everything. Completely, without distraction, with the full force of her considerable personality aimed directly at whoever was lucky enough to be sitting across from her. She had asked Huda over the past several Sundays about Trinidad in installments, a different piece each week, building a picture with the patience of someone who wanted the complete thing rather than the summary. This Sunday it was carnival. "Explain it to me," she said over the pillow. "All of it. That's a large request. I have time and good rice. Go." Huda smiled. 2 days before Lent. The whole country stops being itself and becomes something louder and more honest. Music everywhere. Soca, calypso, steel pan, starting from weeks before in fetes and parties until it builds to the street. People in costumes that are basically art, feathers and beadwork and colors that have no name in other languages. She paused. "You don't sleep. Nobody sleeps. You wake up before dawn on the Monday and you're in the street and the music is already there. Already going. Like it never stopped." Yonhee was listening with her whole face, her fork forgotten. "And your mother? During carnival?" "She was a different person," Huda said, and smiled at the memory, the kind of smile that holds something bittersweet and has decided to lead with the sweet. She put on her costume and she went into that street and she was free. Completely. Like the whole year she was practical and careful and responsible, and carnival was the 2 days she gave herself permission to just be. Fully. She looked at the slate blue bowl. She used to say, "This is what we're made of underneath. This is the real thing." The table was quiet. Siwon was watching her with that expression. The unguarded one, the one she had learned by now, was the truest version of his face. Yonhee set down her fork with the deliberate care of a woman making a decision. "I want to go," she said. Huda looked at her. "To Trinidad?" "To Trinidad. Completely certain. I want to see it. The colors, the market, the house with the yellow walls." She looked at Huda directly. Take me. Yonhee. I'm serious. She looked at Siwon. Tell her I'm serious. She's serious, Siwon said. She's been serious about this since the first Sunday. Huda looked between them. You've discussed this. We've discussed many things, Yonhee said, with the blameless tone that meant she had been planning this for at least 3 weeks. I want to see where you come from. I want to stand in the place that made you. She reached across the table and covered Huda's hand with hers. You came to Seoul and you made it yours. Let me come to Trinidad and understand why you are the way you are. The dining room was very still. Outside the garden held the last of the Sunday light, going golden at the edges the way light did when it was getting ready to become evening. Huda looked at this woman. This extraordinary, relentless, silk-robed, peony-loving, sugar-burning, group chat-running woman who had looked at her in a hospital room on a Tuesday morning and decided, with no consultation and complete certainty, that she was family, and felt something open in her chest that had been waiting quietly and patiently for exactly this. Carnival is in February, she said. Yonhee's face broke into that young, brilliant smile. I'll start packing. It's October. Good. Plenty of time to find the right outfits. She picked up her fork. Siwon, write this down. He already had his phone out. Huda looked at her pillow in the slate blue bowl and thought about Port of Spain in February, about colors that had no name in other languages, about a yellow-walled kitchen and a woman in a hibiscus house dress and the specific weight of Caribbean light. She thought about bringing this, all of this, these two people and their notebooks and their perfectly timed coffees and their burned sugar and their Sunday tables, home. She thought it might be the best thing she had ever considered. It was Sulji. Of course it was Sulji. Not because Sulji was careless. She was, in fact, one of the more observant people on the floor, which was precisely the problem. She had known for 3 weeks. She had seen them together outside a cafe in Hongdae on a Saturday afternoon. Huda in a caramel leather jacket and vintage wash straight-leg jeans and the kind of effortless off-duty energy that made people look twice. Siwon beside her in a dark coat. Both of them holding drinks, walking with the specific unhurried ease of two people who had nowhere urgent to be and were treating that fact as a luxury. She had seen them before they saw her, which had given her approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. She had walked the other direction. This had been, she understood, a significant act of loyalty, one she was quietly proud of. She had said nothing to nobody for 22 days. This was, by any measure, extraordinary. She was 24. She worked in a building with 40 nurses, most of whom treated information the way the stock market treated currency. Constantly moving, never still, value determined entirely by timing. She lasted 22 days. It was the Wednesday morning briefing that broke her. Soyeon had spent 11 of the briefing's scheduled 15 minutes presenting what she was calling observations about Huda's schedule, which included a color-coded chart that she had made on her own time, which was the most alarming thing about it, tracking Huda's lunch break times against the known visiting schedule of Kong Siwon. The chart had a title. The title was Pattern Analysis. There was a legend. Sulji had looked at the chart. She had looked at Nurse Park Ji-young, who was nodding at the chart. She had looked at Head Nurse Beck, who was looking at the chart with the expression of a woman who had seen many things in her career and had made peace with most of them. And something in Sulji, some 24-year-old, truth-compelled, loyalty, conflicted part of her had simply given way. They're dating, she said. The briefing room went silent. Soyeon turned from her chart. What? I saw them. Together. In Hongdae. 3 weeks ago. Sulji looked at the color-coded chart. You don't need the pattern analysis. They're just together. The silence lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then the briefing room became something that was technically not chaos because everyone remained seated but spiritually was absolutely chaos. Multiple conversations simultaneously, Ji-young's hand going to her mouth, 2 of the junior nurses from the evening shift exchanging a look of profound vindication, and Soyeon standing at the front of the room with her color-coded chart and the expression of a woman who had spent 3 weeks building a case and had just been told the verdict by a witness. She hadn't subpoenaed. Head Nurse Beck cleared her throat. The room went quiet. The briefing, she said, with the specific authority of a woman who had not survived 30 years in hospital administration by engaging with interpersonal dramatics during scheduled work hours, is about the new patient intake protocol, which we will now return to. She looked around the room. What the staff do outside of these walls is not hospital business. What happens inside these walls is. She picked up her tablet. Intake protocol. Page 4. The briefing continued. But the information had left the room, which was the thing about information in buildings designed for observation. Once it was out, it traveled at the speed of people who had somewhere to be and something to say when they got there. Huda arrived for her Thursday morning shift in the best scrubs she owned. Not by accident. Camille had called the night before, at 10:23 p.m., with the slightly breathless energy of someone who had received intelligence from multiple sources simultaneously, and said, "Baby, they know." Huda had been in bed reading. She had set her book down. How? Sulji. Hongdae. 3 weeks ago, apparently. Pause. Soyeon made a chart. Of course she did. With a legend, Huda. A color-coded legend. Huda had looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she had gotten up, gone to her wardrobe, and selected her Thursday outfit with the focused intention of a woman going into a situation she intended to win aesthetically. The scrubs were a deep burgundy, a color she had been saving without knowing what for, fitted perfectly, paired with clean white sneakers and her locks pinned in the most structured, architectural style she owned. Small gold studs. Her stethoscope, the good one, the one with the rose gold finish that she had bought herself as a 2-year soul anniversary gift, around her neck. She looked, by any clinical standard, like a woman who had come to work and nothing else whatsoever. She walked in at 7:58, 2 minutes before her shift, through the main entrance of the private wing, past the nurses' station where Soyeon and Jiyoung and 2 junior nurses were standing with the very specific casualness of people who had been waiting and needed to appear not to have been waiting. She said good morning to all of them. She picked up her first chart. She began her round. Nobody said anything for 11 minutes, which was, she knew, its own kind of pressure, the building silence of people who had something to say and were waiting for permission or provocation. She gave them neither. She moved through her morning with the same unhurried competence she brought to every Thursday, every day, every shift she had ever worked in these corridors. She checked vitals. She updated charts. She spoke to patients with the warm, specific attention that had made her the best nurse on the floor before any of this and would continue to make her the best nurse on the floor regardless of any of this. At 9:15, Sulji appeared beside her at the medication cart. "I'm sorry," Sulji said, quietly. "I held it for 22 days. Huda looked at her. The girl's face was genuinely troubled. Not the performed guilt of someone seeking absolution, but the real discomfort of a person who had values and had felt them conflict. 22 days is actually impressive, Huda said. Sulji blinked. Really? This floor? 22 days is extraordinary. I would have given you 10. She handed Sulji a medication tray. 406 needs her 11 o'clock. She likes it if you tell her what each one is. Sulji took the tray. That's it. That's it. Huda picked up her chart. You're good at this job, Sulji. Don't let other people's drama distract you from that. Sulji stood for a moment with her medication tray, looking at Huda with the expression of a 24-year-old who was recalibrating several things simultaneously. Then she nodded, straightened, and went to 406. Soyeon found her at the nurse's station at 11:30. She came without the chart this time, which meant she had decided on a different approach. Direct, personal, the kind of conversation that required no visual aids. She stood at the station with the careful posture of a woman who had prepared what she wanted to say and was delivering it. I want you to know, Soyeon said, that I don't have a problem with it. Huda looked up from her chart. With you and whoever. Soyeon's hands were folded in front of her. I just think transparency is important in a workplace. Transparency, Huda said. We work together. We should know relevant things about each other. My personal relationships are relevant to our work. How, exactly? Soyeon's composure shifted slightly. Not much, just the small recalibration of someone whose prepared speech has been met with a question it didn't account for. It's just. Soyeon. Huda set down her pen. She looked at this woman who had been, for 2 years, a consistent low-level source of friction, who had spent 3 weeks building a color-coded chart, who was standing here now with her folded hands. And her transparency argument, and felt not unkindness but the specific clarity of someone who had decided a thing was over. I've worked on this floor for 2 years, Huda said, quietly. In that time I have been professional, thorough, and good to every patient in my care. I have never let anything outside this building affect what happens inside it. She looked at Soyeon directly. What I do outside these walls is mine. It will remain mine. And the next time you make a chart about my schedule, I'd encourage you to think carefully about whether that's the best use of your considerable energy. She paused. Because you are, actually, a good nurse, Soyeon. You're careful and you're thorough and your patients trust you. That's worth more than a legend and a color code. Soyeon stared at her. Mrs. Han in 411 needs her afternoon vitals, Huda said, picking up her pen. She responds better to you than to most of us. Something about your manner with elderly patients is genuinely good. She looked back at her chart. Go do that. Soyeon stood for one more moment. Something in her expression moved through several stages and arrived somewhere that was not quite resolution but was closer to it than where it had started. Then she picked up her own chart and walked down the corridor toward 411. Head Nurse Beck, who had been 3 meters away at the filing cabinet for the entirety of this exchange, closed a drawer with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had seen the right thing happen and was filing that away too. Siwon called at 6:15. She was in her going-home shoes, bag on her shoulder, walking through the lobby when the phone buzzed. She answered without checking the name because she already knew. I heard, he said. News travels. My mother called me at noon. A pause. She was delighted. Of course she was. Huda pushed through the glass doors into the evening. She's been waiting for this. She asked if you wore the burgundy. Huda stopped on the pavement. How did she know about the burgundy? She didn't, he said. She guessed. Based on. She could hear the almost smile in his voice. What she called your confrontation aesthetic. Huda stood on the pavement outside Sungwon Medical Center in the October evening and laughed, the full kind, the real one, at the specific absurdity of a woman who had never seen the burgundy scrubs somehow knowing they existed and understanding exactly when they would be deployed. She's terrifying, Huda said. Completely, he agreed. Are you free Saturday? Why? I want to show you something. A pause. Something I haven't shown many people. She looked at the Seoul evening. The city doing its thing, indifferent and beautiful, the lights beginning to matter more than they did an hour ago. Saturday, she said. I'll pick you up at 10. A beat. From your actual building. Not from around the corner. She felt that land somewhere warm. Progress, she said. We're done hiding, he said simply. It was never the right word for it anyway. She walked home through the Seoul evening thinking about that. We're done hiding. And the way he had said it like it was the most straightforward thing, like the decision had been made and required no ceremony, like he was a man who, when he decided something, simply decided it and moved accordingly. She thought, not for the first time and with increasing frequency, that her mother would have called him good people without a moment's hesitation. Capital G, capital P. No revision required. Trinidad in February was exactly what she had promised and several things she hadn't known she was promising until they arrived, and she saw it through their eyes. They landed on a Thursday, all 3 of them, as had been established would be the case from the moment Yeonhee had said I'll start packing over Sunday Palo in October. Yeonhee had, in the intervening 4 months, prepared for this trip with the focused energy of a woman approaching a significant project. She had read 3 books about Caribbean history, watched 2 documentaries about Trinidad that she had reported on in detail during Sunday dinners, and acquired, through methods Huda had not asked about, a contact in Port of Spain who had recommended a guest house that Yeonhee had deemed acceptable after a video consultation with the owner. She had also, Huda discovered at the airport, packed 6 outfits specifically for Carnival, which she had sourced with help from a stylist she used in Seoul, and which ranged from the surprisingly appropriate to the genuinely magnificent. You prepared, Huda said, at Piarco International Airport, watching the baggage carousel produce Yeonhee's 3rd piece of luggage. I always prepare, Yeonhee said, watching the carousel with the patient authority of a woman who knew her luggage would arrive because she had specifically requested it be loaded last. I prepared for you too. Huda looked at her. What does that mean? It means I spoke to a woman at a fabric stall in the market near Gyeongbokgung, who knew a woman in Port of Spain who makes costumes. Yeonhee's 4th bag appeared. You have a carnival costume waiting. So does Siwon. She paused. His took some negotiating. The measurements were specific. Siwon, beside Huda, looked at the ceiling of Piarco International Airport. You commissioned carnival costumes, Huda said. Months ago, Yonhee accepted her fourth bag from the carousel. From Port of Spain. For all three of us. She looked at Huda. With those sharp, warm eyes. I wasn't coming to your home and watching from the outside. Huda, I came to be in it. Port of Spain received them the way it received everyone. Loudly, warmly, without ceremony. With the specific generosity of a place that had decided long ago that it had enough to share and would do so without being asked. The heat hit them at the airport doors, the real Caribbean heat. Not the flat weight of it but the living kind, warm and present. The kind her mother had described as the island breathing. Yonhee stopped at the doors and simply stood in it for a moment. Eyes closed, face lifted slightly. Like a woman receiving something she had been waiting for without knowing it. Saiwin watched his mother. Huda watched Saiwin watch his mother. This, Yonhee said, eyes still closed, is what you meant, about the light. Yes, Huda said. It touches you back. She opened her eyes. They were bright. Let's go. The yellow-walled house was still yellow. Huda had not been back since her mother passed. Had not been ready, then and then had been in Seoul, and time had done what time does. Accumulating in the specific way that makes return both more necessary and more difficult with each passing year. She had arranged for a neighbor, Mrs. Phillip, to look after it. A woman of approximately 70 who treated the responsibility with the seriousness of a sacred trust and had sent Huda photographs every 3 months with brief, specific reports. Galvanize on the kitchen roof held through the rain season. Bougainvillea on the gate growing well. Your mother's hibiscus in the backyard still flowering. It was flowering now. Deep red. Against the yellow wall, in the February heat, exactly as it always had been. Huda stood at the gate for a moment before opening it. Not long, just long enough to acknowledge the weight of return, to let it be what it was before she moved through it. She felt a hand at the small of her back. Not pressing. Not directing, just present. Saiwin, beside her, saying nothing because he understood, as he consistently seemed to understand, exactly when silence was the right language. She opened the gate. Yonhee walked through the yellow-walled house with the reverent attention of a woman in a museum, except warmer, touching things lightly, asking questions about the photographs on the wall, standing in the kitchen doorway for a long time looking at the window above the sink through which the afternoon light came in the specific way that light comes in through windows it has been coming through for years, worn into a particular pattern by repetition and time. She cooked here, Yonhee said. Not a question. Every day, Huda said. Yonhee nodded slowly. She looked at the stove, the counter, the particular arrangement of a kitchen that had been organized by someone's specific habits and had retained their logic even in their absence. Then she looked at Huda with an expression so full of something warm and complex and specifically maternal that Huda had to look away briefly at the bougainvillea through the window. She would have loved you, Huda said, for the second time in her life. The first having been about someone else, in a different city, over candlelight. Genuinely. She would have claimed you. That's what she did with people she loved. She just claimed them. You belonged to her and that was it. Yonhee was quiet for a moment. Good, she said finally softly, because I would have claimed her right back. Carnival arrived on Monday with the specific inevitability of something that had been building for weeks. The fates and the parties and the soca coming from everywhere. The city recalibrating itself toward its truest frequency. The particular electric quality of the air in the days before that Huda had forgotten until she was standing in it again and remembered immediately, in her body before her mind, what this felt like. She was in her costume by 4:30 in the morning, the Monday before dawn, Juvert, the real beginning. A deep jewel blue and gold, structured at the bodice, fluid everywhere else, her locks loose and free for the first time in months, the way her mother had worn hers for carnival. The only 2 days a year she let them fully down. Yonhee came out of her room in a version of the same costume. Adapted, Huda had been told, per specific request, in a deep champagne and silver that was somehow both completely appropriate for a 64-year-old Korean woman and absolutely the most spectacular thing on the street. Her silver hair was down. She had the pearl earrings on, because of course she did, because Yonhee accessorized by instinct and the instinct was always right. She looked at Huda and said, "Your mother was right. This is the real thing." Huda looked at her. This woman in champagne and silver in a Trinidad doorway at 4:30 in the morning, who had flown across the world to stand in a yellow-walled house and understand the shape of a life, who had named a group chat the Pillow Project and burned sugar on purpose for 3 Sundays and looked at a nurse in teal scrubs on a Tuesday morning and simply known, and felt love move through her the way the music was already moving through the streets outside, completely and without asking permission. Ready, Huda said. Since October, Yonhi said, and walked out into the street. Saiwan came out last, and Huda turned to look at him, in his costume, which he had worn with the same quiet acceptance he brought to everything, and which looked, because he was who he was, completely right. And he looked back at her in the Trinidad pre-dawn with the full version of that expression, the rare one, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "You look like home." She looked at him. "Not mine," he said. "Yours. You look like this place. Like you and it are the same thing." He paused. "I understand now why soul wasn't enough." "Soul is enough," she said. "Soul has everything I need." Everything. She looked at him. Almost everything. It was missing this. She gestured. At the street. At the house. At the sound of soca already beginning somewhere in the dark. "And now it has it too. I carry it with me." He reached out and tucked a lock behind her ear. Gently, completely without agenda. Just a man touching the face of a woman he loved in the specific way of someone who had decided and was no longer performing the decision. "Saiwan," she said. "I know," he said. "Later. Let's go." They went into the street where the music was already everything and the dark was beginning to make way for something better. All 3 of them, into the Port of Spain carnival morning. And Yonhi grabbed both their hands and walked between them like a woman who had exactly what she came for and intended to make it last as long as possible. The beach was called Maracas. Huda had been going since she was 6 years old. A 40-minute drive from Port of Spain through the mountains, the road winding through green so dense and specific it felt like driving through the inside of something living. And then the coast appearing suddenly, the Caribbean Sea wide and immediate and the color of something that didn't have a name in languages that hadn't been invented here. She had brought her mother here. She had been brought here by her mother. She had come alone when alone was the only option, and sat on the sand and had conversations with the water that were one-sided but not, she had decided, unanswered. She brought them on the Wednesday, 3 days into the trip, the day after Carnival, when the city was coming down from itself and the quieter, truer version of the island reasserted itself. They arrived at mid-morning, the beach not yet full, the light doing exactly what she had promised Yonhi it would do. Yonhi walked to the water's edge and stood there for a long time. Huda watched her from up the beach, this silver-haired woman in wide-leg linen trousers in cream and a silk blouse the color of the inside of a shell, standing at the edge of the Caribbean Sea, looking at the horizon with the expression of someone receiving something they had not known they needed. She felt Saiwan beside her. "She's going to cry," he said quietly. "She's already crying," Huda said. "She's just doing it at the water so we can't see." He looked at his mother. A long, warm look. "She's been different since we landed. Everyone is different here. It does something." Huda looked at the water. "The island demands your actual self. It doesn't have space for the other version. The other version of her is fine," he said. "But this one," he paused. "This one is her before everything got complicated. Before my father died. Before the weight of all of it." He was quiet for a moment. "I haven't seen her like this in years." Huda looked at him. "Years is a long time to carry weight. She carries it beautifully. That doesn't mean it isn't heavy." He looked at her. "No," he said. "It doesn't." They walked down to join Yonhi at the water's edge. She heard them coming and straightened, composed, with the practiced ease of a woman who had been managing her own dignity since before either of them was born. But her eyes were bright when she turned, and she didn't try to hide that. "It's everything," she said. "All of it. Everything you described." "I know," Huda said. "More than everything." Yonhi looked at her. "How did you leave?" "Carefully," Huda said. "And with the intention of carrying it with me." Yonhi nodded slowly. She looked at Saiwan. Something passed between them, the specific wordless communication of a mother and son who had been each other's primary person for 11 years, and then she said, "I'm going to find the bake and shark." I was told about the bake and shark specifically. There was a lengthy description in one of the books. She began walking up the beach toward the food stalls with the purposeful energy of a woman on a mission, which she always was. And then it was just the 2 of them. The water, the light, the specific weight of it touching you back. Saiwen was quiet for a while. The comfortable kind, the kind she had learned was his default when he was thinking about something he intended to say correctly rather than quickly. She had learned to let it breathe, to not fill it, which was its own thing for her. She had grown up in a culture where silence was rude and a pause was an invitation, and the correct response to someone not talking was to talk more. She had learned his silences the way she had learned the market, by showing up consistently and paying attention. "I've been thinking about something," he said finally. "Okay. Since October." He looked at the water. "Since the Sunday with the pillow and the bowl and my mother telling me to write down the coconut milk." She smiled despite herself. "That was a setup. Everything has been a setup." He said it without complaint, with the same fond rueful affection he always brought to his mother's machinations. "But that Sunday watching you in that kitchen, in my mother's house, with the light coming through that window." He paused. "Something settled. In here." He touched his chest briefly, unconsciously. "Something that had been deciding, and it decided." The water moved up the sand and back. "I'm not going to make a speech," he said. "You know I don't make speeches." "I know. But I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it here, in this place that made you, because that felt right in a way I couldn't explain if I tried." He turned to look at her. Fully, directly. The full weight of his attention aimed at her with no reservation. "I love you. I've loved you since a hospital corridor and a supply room door and a woman who looked at me like I needed to answer a question." He paused. "I want to keep showing up. Consistently, specifically, for as long as you'll have me showing up." Another pause. "Is that something you want?" The Caribbean Sea did what it did, moved, breathed, existed with the specific indifference of something that had been here long before this moment and would be here long after. Huda looked at this man, who had come to a hospital pretending and stayed because he couldn't pretend anymore, who had written a recipe in a leather notebook and timed a coffee to the minute and asked a woman to dinner without hiding behind anyone else's agenda, who had flown to Trinidad and put on a carnival costume and stood in a yellow-walled kitchen understanding what it meant, and felt the thing she had been carrying carefully since a Tuesday morning in teal scrubs simply set itself down. "I love you," she said, "since the elevator. When you said I could call you Saiwen and meant it as something more than a name." He exhaled, small, real, the exhale of a man who had been holding something and had just been told he could put it down. "Yes," she said, "that's something I want." He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just the simple claiming of a hand by a hand, the most ordinary and the most significant gesture in the available vocabulary. They stood at the edge of the Caribbean Sea in the Maracas morning with the light doing exactly what she had promised it would do, touching them both back, and behind them up the beach Yonhee was standing at a food stall with a piece of bacon shark, watching them with the expression of a woman who had prayed for something specific and was watching it answered in real time. She took a bite of her bake and shark. She took out her phone. "She typed to the Pillow Project?" he asked. She said yes. "We're at a beach in Trinidad and the food here is extraordinary and I think I might never leave." Her best friend responded in 4 seconds. YONHE. Mrs. O from next door sent 7 heart emojis. Yonhee ate her bacon shark and watched the two people she loved stand at the edge of the sea and felt, in the Trinidad morning with the Caribbean light and the sound of the water and the smell of the food and all of it, the specific profound joy of a woman who had been lonely in the way of old houses and had found, unexpectedly and completely, that the house was full again. The proposal happened on a Tuesday. Of course it did. It had always been Tuesdays. Back in Seoul, 3 months after Trinidad, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in the kitchen of Yonhee's house where the pillow had started and the Sunday dinners had accumulated and the slate blue bowl lived on the shelf like a monument to everything that had happened in and around it, Saiwen had made dinner. Alone, without help, without burning the sugar, getting the moment exactly right because he had been practicing for months and had learned, finally, to watch the edges. Huda had arrived at 7, in wide-leg trousers in a warm sand color and a fitted deep burgundy blouse, locks down her Tuesday self, the off-duty one, the real one, the one that wore gold hoops and comfortable shoes and had nowhere to be except exactly here. She had walked into the kitchen and smelled the pillow and looked at him standing at the stove with his sleeves rolled up and felt that settling thing happen in her chest. The same thing that happened every time, that she had stopped being surprised by and started simply receiving like the Caribbean light. Something that touched you back. After dinner, at the table, with the slate blue bowl between them and the peony arrangement he had done before making herself very specifically absent for the evening. He had taken a small box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table. Not on her plate. Not pressed into her hand with a speech. Just set it there, on the table, between them, like something that belonged in this space and was simply taking its place. She had looked at it. She had looked at him. Tuesday, she said. It was always going to be a Tuesday, he said. She opened the box. The ring was not what she expected. Not large, not flashy. Nothing that announced itself. A single oval stone in a deep warm cognac, set simply in gold, the color of the market morning and the leather blazer and the light in a yellow-walled kitchen in Port of Spain. A color that was specifically and completely hers. Your mother chose it, she said. We chose it together, he said. She found the stone. I chose the setting. A pause. She said the color was yours before I said anything. Huda looked at the ring. Then at the man across the table who had come to a hospital pretending and never pretended again after that, who had shown up consistently and specifically, who had stood at the edge of the Caribbean Sea and asked for exactly what he wanted with no performance attached to it. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. He smiled. The full one, the rare one. And reached across the table and put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it against her skin and thought it was the most exactly right thing she had ever worn. From somewhere in the house came the very small, very quickly suppressed sound of Kang Yeonhee, who had been absolutely not listening from the hallway, making a sound that was technically not a sob but contained every element of one. The wedding was in Trinidad. There had never been a question about where it would be. Huda had known, in the vague way you know things about yourself before the occasion for them arrives, that if she ever got married it would be somewhere her mother's spirit could attend. Somewhere the light had weight and the colors were unapologetic and the music came from everywhere without being asked. It was in the garden of a house in Port of Spain in the early evening of a Saturday in November, when the heat had softened to something generous and the light was doing its golden hour thing, long and warm and touching everything back. The bougainvillea was in full color. There were white peonies everywhere, which was entirely Yeonhee's doing and which nobody had argued with because the peonies were perfect and Yeonhee was always right about flowers. Huda wore ivory. Not a gown, not a dress, but a two-piece. A fitted strapless bodice in structured ivory silk and a full skirt that moved. When she walked, floor-length, with a train that was just enough. Her locks were down and adorned with small white flowers threaded through at intervals. A style that had taken her and Camille 3 hours and 2 arguments and had resulted in the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen on a human head. She wore the cognac ring on her right hand and a thin gold band on her left and her mother's earrings. Small gold drops that had been in a box in the yellow-walled house and that Mrs. Phillip had pressed into her hands on the morning of the wedding with the specific solemnity of someone completing a task they had been trusted with. She looked, Camille told her, getting emotional in the way of someone who had told themselves they wouldn't and had been wrong, like every version of herself at once. Yeonhee wore the color of champagne. A silk two-piece in a pale gold that was warm enough to not be bridal, an architectural jacket over wide trousers, pearl drops, silver hair pinned in the most elegant arrangement of the year. She had debated 7 outfits over 3 Sundays and Huda had sat through all 7 presentations and given honest assessments because Yeonhee demanded honest assessments and the champagne gold had been right from the beginning. She cried from the moment Huda appeared at the garden entrance. Not quietly, not in the managed way of a woman maintaining dignity. She cried the way she laughed. Fully, without apology, the young version of herself coming through the practice surface, pressing both hands to her mouth and crying with her whole face in the Trinidad evening while Mrs. O from next door, who had come because Yeonhee had invited her because he did not do small versions of things, put an arm around her and cried alongside her in solidarity. The Pillow Project group chat received 17 messages during the ceremony. Siwon, at the front of the garden under the arch of white peonies and bougainvillea, watched Huda walk toward him through the Trinidad evening light and felt the same thing he had felt on a beach at Maracas, that settling, that deciding, complete and irreversible, except larger now, the full version of it, without any remaining reservation or distance. She reached him. Tuesday energy, she said quietly so only he could hear. Always, he said. The ceremony was in English and Korean both. Huda had arranged a bilingual officiant because Yeonhee deserved to understand every word, which Yeonhee had heard about and immediately added 4 more messages to the group chat about. They said what needed to be said. They said it simply and meant it completely. When it was done, when it was real, Yeonhee was the first person to reach them. Moving through the small crowd of people with the speed and focus of a woman with somewhere specific to be, and she took Huda's face in both her hands and looked at her for a long moment with those sharp dark eyes that had looked at a nurse in teal scrubs on a Tuesday morning and simply known. "My daughter," she said, quiet, certain, no ceremony in it. Huda covered Yeonhee's hands with hers. "My mother," she said back. The garden was very still for exactly one moment. Then Camille, somewhere behind them, made a sound that started as a tempting composure and became its complete opposite. And the stillness broke into laughter and movement and the specific beautiful chaos of people who loved each other being in one place at the same time. The reception was everything. The polo was served from the slate blue bowl, made by Siwon and Huda together, the morning of, in the yellow-walled kitchen with the window that let in the light, with the scotch bonnet whole and unbroken and the coconut milk full fat and the pigeon peas dried not canned and the sugar brown to exactly the moment. And it was the best thing anyone at that reception had ever eaten or would eat for a considerable time. And 3 separate people asked for the recipe. And were told it was a family secret. The music came from everywhere because this was Trinidad and music always came from everywhere. And at some point in the evening, past 9, when the heat had fully softened and the stars were out and the garden was lit with the warm gold of string lights, someone had threaded through everything. Huda looked across the reception and found Yeonhee. She was dancing. Actually dancing. Not the careful, composed movement of a woman maintaining social grace, but the real thing, the full thing, the way her mother had danced at carnival in a hibiscus house dress, completely herself, completely free. She was dancing with Camille, who had adopted her at some point in the evening with the same thoroughness with which she adopted all people she decided mattered, and they were dancing together in the Trinidad night with the full cooperation of the music and the complete absence of self-consciousness and the specific joy of 2 women who had found, in the orbit of the same person, an unexpected and entirely genuine friendship. Siwon appeared beside Huda, a glass in each hand, and followed her gaze. They watched his mother dance. "She's been waiting for this," he said. "Not the wedding. All of it. Someone to dance with again." Huda took her glass. "She has the whole island now." He smiled. "She's already been invited to 3 neighborhood fetes. I don't think she's leaving." Huda looked at the garden, at the peonies and the bougainvillea and the yellow wall visible beyond the lights and the people she loved scattered through all of it, Camille and Yeonhee dancing and Mrs. Phillip eating polo in a chair of honor and the Trinidad night doing what it did, warm and loud and completely itself, and felt something so complete it didn't have a name in any language she knew. "She prayed for a daughter," Huda said. "She got an island," he said. Huda laughed. "She got an island." He took her hand. They went to dance. And Kang Yeonhee, pausing mid-movement to take a sip of something cold and survey the garden that had once been a yellow-walled house and was now the fullest place she had been in 11 years, took out her phone and typed one final message to the Polo project. "We're in Trinidad. My daughter is married. The Polo is perfect. The music hasn't stopped. I think this is what I was waiting for. I think this is what I was always waiting for." She put the phone away. She went back to dancing. The Trinidad night received her completely.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that sometimes the life you are meant to live is waiting on the other side of the place you are brave enough to live, and the people meant to walk it with you have a way of finding you there. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.